Well, homeschoolers are embarking on a brave new world of government-sponsored home education. And if you have followed me for even a day, you probably know I am totally against vouchers, education savings accounts, or whatever other fancy name they use to give you money for your homeschooling. And I just want to share a little bit today about homeschool freedom. Part of what I want to share with you today is what I shared with Oklahoma homeschoolers this past week at the Capitol when Homeschool Oklahoma held their Capitol Days to, visit their representatives and talk about homeschool freedom and try to protect the freedoms that homeschoolers have. And I just want to share my thoughts that I shared with them with everyone who's listening because I really truly want you to understand how important homeschool freedom is and how to keep it. And so, if you've ever heard my story, you probably know that I was homeschooled. And what some of you may not know is that my parents were arrested for homeschooling. So, let me tell you a little story. Hi, this is Nicki Truesdell. I believe that education is discipleship. Anyone can homeschool. There's no such thing as behind, and it doesn't take 12 years to educate a child. Welcome to my podcast. This was back in 1983. We had been homeschooling for just 1 month, and we lived in Oklahoma in a little town called Terrell. And my mom and dad remember this day because the sheriff's department sent officers and knocked on our door very early. We were all still in bed, woke us up, and were there to arrest my mom and dad for truancy. And my aunt, Carrie, who has been a guest on this podcast, you can go back and find that one, the Homeschool Veteran Pioneer podcast. She was also homeschooling my two cousins in the same town. She was actually a single mom. And so she was arrested as well. And they were all three taken to the county sheriff's department and held for the day. What they didn't know and what the sheriff's department didn't know, and the town officials, whoever called in this report of my parents, they didn't know that Oklahoma has always had a protection for homeschoolers since statehood, since their constitution was written. But by the end of that day, everyone knew it. And behind the scenes that day, there were phone calls being made on behalf of my mom and dad and my Aunt Carrie. And these were lawyers who would eventually form what we now know as the Homeschool Legal Defense Association. And so these guys got on the phone, alerted the sheriff's department and let them know that no laws had actually been broken. And for whatever reason, a trial date was set for the following January. And so my mom and dad and my Aunt Carrie were released by the end of that day. Some people they want to know what happened to the kids. So I have a sister and I had two cousins, and all of us went to our pastor's house where the pastor's wife took care of us for the day until everyone was released. And I don't remember much about the feelings I had that day. I was 11 years old when this happened. I do remember the early morning knock at the door and the uncertainty of having my parents taken off in a police car, but the rest of it is a little bit blurry. But I will tell you that did affect how we homeschooled. Only because, it was the 80s and we were the only homeschoolers in this very small town. And if you live in a small town, you know that everyone knows your business. And so the following homeschool years after that were years of caution. We were very careful about how much time we spent outdoors during school hours, even though we did get to go out and play. And of course, shopping excursions and things like that. That was in 1983. 2 years later, we moved back to Texas, which is where I'm from, born and raised. And at that time, homeschooling was not yet legal in Texas in 1985. So, of course, we continued our careful behavior, homeschooling, and what we did in the day. We didn't stay locked up at home, throughout the day, but we were very careful because it was illegal. In 1986, there was a giant rally in Austin at the Capitol called the Austin Tea Party, and the T was TEA for the Texas Education Association. So the TEA was trying to formally outlaw homeschooling in Texas. but they did not succeed, thankfully. We were part of the group that went down there to rally for homeschool freedom in 1986. And all over the United States, similar stories were happening. I'm very thankful that my parents' story was not any worse than an arrest, um, and the charges were dropped the following January, and so nothing further ever happened. But in many other states, there were homeschoolers being arrested and charged with truancy, fighting for their rights as parents. Some families had their children taken away for a time, some were actually jailed, and so some stories were much more dramatic and very real. And the reason I share this is because it's been over 40 years now since that time. And so a lot of people don't realize just what the homeschool pioneers did to secure the freedoms we have today. As I said, I'm in Texas, and our homeschooling was not legalized until 1994. Some of you don't remember those days. Some of you were born in the 1990s. And so the reason I'm sharing this is so that you understand the importance of protecting our homeschool freedom. During the 80s and even the 90s, homeschool families kept a phone number by the door in case officers or CPS officials might come to the door to question their right to homeschool. They would have the lawyer's phone number or HSLDA's phone number, and in case you don't know who that is, Homeschool Legal Defense Association. Or they would have a list of things to say and do and not do in case some truancy officials came to the door. That was the reality in the early years of homeschooling. At some point, all 50 states had legalized homeschooling, and that's what I think was some of the best times. And so my parents, my aunt, those of us who were kids during that time is what I like to call the first wave of homeschoolers. Homeschooling was not popular in the 70s, but there were people doing it. It really picked up steam in the 1980s after Focus on the Family Radio aired an interview with Raymond and Dorothy Moore about home education, and that it took off in the 80s. And that first wave were definitely majority Christian families who chose home education as a distinctly biblical alternative to the growing Marxist humanist agenda in the government schools. And as one of the first wave, I have a lot of fond memories of those quaint early homeschooling years. It was pre-internet, it was pre-co-op. We homeschooled at home. Our moms and sometimes dads were the teachers. We started every single morning with Bible time. And my parents were new Christians at the time, and so they had learned quickly how important it was for them to know the Bible, but to also teach it to their children. And so we read the Bible and memorized the Bible every morning. But our family was close. We had Christian curriculum, and I literally say it changed our family tree, and it will change your family tree if you homeschool. Most importantly, we were sheltered from the world, and I sincerely appreciate that because people say shelter's bad. Some homeschoolers have grown up to be bitter and angry at their parents, but anyone with wisdom understands how important it is to shelter children from worldliness and ungodliness while they're young, and then teach them and train them to encounter all of those things as they grow, but in an age-appropriate way. And that's what my parents really did. And so we grew up without a TV at this point. And so we were taught by our parents. We were at church every time the doors were open, very active in our churches. We did not have the outside influences of the world, and it was a wonderful way to grow up, and I'm so thankful for it. And I encourage you to also try a very sheltered upbringing for your children for a time until they are ready to start going out in the world and experiencing, defending their worldview and learning how to relate. This is not hiding your children, it's appropriate shelter. It's kind of like a greenhouse. When plants are small, they need to be protected, and then they need occasional exposure to the outdoors, which is called hardening off, before you plant them permanently in the ground. And I think that's a great way to grow up, and I can speak from experience. But my parents, They chose this because they had come out of a very sinful, hippie, drug addicted lifestyle, and they knew that there were alternatives. And so I am so thankful for what they did for us. And the reason my parents, after being arrested, went ahead and moved to a state where homeschooling was illegal and kept homeschooling was because they had a very strong conviction. And this is something that I always encourage people to do, is to remember why you chose homeschooling, write down your reasons, and keep them handy, because there will be times when you doubt yourself or it's hard and you wonder what in the world you were thinking, and remembering your reasons why is so important. So I graduated in 1990, and for several years, of course, I didn't concern myself with homeschool freedom or education law. My first child was born in 1996, and some of you listening will understand what I mean when I say I started homeschooling her pretty much from birth. As soon as she could sit up and focus on things with her eyes, we were reading books together, and I, played songs for her and sang to her. So I was so ready to be a homeschool parent. Now, homeschooling had become legalized by this time in Texas, so it had only been a couple of years. But this is what I call the second wave of homeschoolers. When homeschool freedom has been secured, it's not illegal, you're not necessarily worrying about being arrested, and it's growing in popularity even more. The 90s, the early 2000s. I helped start a homeschool co-op in the year 2000, and I'm proud to say that homeschool co-op is still in existence today, and our family is still attending. We had park days, support group meetings monthly, and most importantly, a really great network of like-minded Christian families. And I used to believe that all we had to do was be careful, watch legislation, and protect our homeschooling to make sure that it didn't become outlawed again, because I felt like that was the major threat, that someone would take away our homeschool freedom. Especially having grown up in the 80s when people were being arrested, I was very concerned that that could happen again. But as the years went on, it wasn't happening. There really wasn't much mention of taking away freedom for homeschooling. Politicians on both sides of the aisle would say, yep, we support homeschoolers. And I don't think they always knew what they meant when they were saying that. But I mean, politicians are there to please people. And honestly, why would any elected official alienate themselves from their constituents by blatantly taking away a freedom? So it felt good. There were no threats, just freedom. And as a child of the first wave of homeschoolers, I knew the price that had been paid. I was there, and I was, and I still am, extremely grateful, because those early pioneers paved the way for the freedom to raise your children in a very different manner than the public school, with any method, any resources, and any schedule that we chose. They gave us the freedom to be little private families who are teaching our children at home. And every family can be different. And as an American history buff, I always look back at what the founders did for us too. And the founders did the same thing for us. They didn't just wake up one day and say, hey guys, I know, let's start a revolution. Let's fight Britain. No, they recognized the threats. They understood the lack of freedom and the threats of that tyranny growing. And they took it upon themselves to do something about it in their lifetime. And one thing, if you read the writings and speeches of our founding fathers, hundreds of times they use the word posterity. They were always thinking about the generations to come after them. John Adams even said, I must study politics and war so that my sons may have the freedom to study mathematics and philosophy. And that's how it is when you think about the homeschool pioneers, who homeschooled with very few resources, no internet, and no co-ops, but with a conviction that this was right for their families. And I see that, the example that my parents set for me. And so when I was ready to homeschool, I wasn't the kind of mom that thought, oh, I can't do this. Maybe I'm not qualified. Maybe we don't have the right circumstances. I already knew that it could be done because I had a mom who had dropped out of school in the ninth grade, and we had no money. We definitely lived at the poverty level, and so I had already seen it done. My parents did the hard part, and they set the example. So for me, it was an easy choice, and it was easy to start doing. And so I just I recognize now what a comfortable time period it was to be in that second wave of homeschoolers, because as long as we kept a watch on our legislators and voted wisely, we should be okay, right? But what I did not see coming was politicians bearing gifts. And so this is what happened. You might think your homeschooling freedom is protected until politicians promise you something like, you can let your homeschool kids play on our public school sports team or join the debate team, or they'll give you a check to pay for your curriculum. This is how they found clever ways to creep in through tiny regulations here and there while claiming to care about things like safety, money, your tax dollars, and even educational rigor. My friends, this is exactly what's happening all over this nation thanks to the voucher movement. When I use the term voucher, I'm referring to any method that the state uses to give you money to homeschool. They call it many things. It all means one thing. It's money to pay for your private education. No matter what it's called, it's all a threat. Even the Tebow bills. Stay with me. I've heard all the arguments. I've heard all the stories. I've heard all the excuses for why it's okay. But money is a strong inducement to compromise principles. There is no argument there. I've seen it happening for years. I've had so many people reach out to me with their arguments. But I want you to make no mistake. State funds for homeschooling are bribes. They're bribing you to give up a little freedom here and a little freedom there until you are suddenly under the jurisdiction of the state. Now, you might be thinking, nope, not in my state. There are no restrictions here. Well, it's not going to happen all at once. In some states, they do introduce restrictions right off the bat. In others, they don't. And when I talk about restrictions, that's going to vary from state to state because some already have restrictions and some don't have any. Texas has a list of things you should teach. I don't recall those restrictions because no one checks. Oklahoma has none. And so in some states, there is literally nothing that the government tells you to do to homeschool. No reporting. No one is doing oversight. No one is requiring a test. That is the ultimate homeschool freedom. And so if they introduce any of those things in exchange for money, it's a restriction. Other states already have restrictions. And so I think people think, well, there's no new restrictions, so it's okay. I just want you to understand that the government never shrinks itself. The government only grows. And so even if your state funding mechanism did not include additional restrictions right up front, it's going to. It's going to be through incremental changes to homeschool laws and even medical freedom laws that parents will see their freedom slowly taken away. They will start with few or even zero regulations. That's the bait. Here, take some money, no strings attached. Once you take the money, it becomes a part of your budget, your monthly budget, your homeschooling budget. You get comfy and you think, well, we've got this much money every year or every month to spend on our homeschool. They've hooked you. So when the next legislative session comes around and a new regulation is added, you're not worried. You can still safely homeschool, right? They haven't taken away your right. Maybe there's a new testing requirement, or maybe the rule is only secular curriculum can be used. Maybe to participate in their sports, you have to sign up for at least one class or agree to the state vaccination schedule. Maybe you won't get reimbursed for Christian curriculum, so you choose one that calls itself neutral. By the way, there is no such thing as neutral. The slope gets very slippery until you have compromised your way back into public education at home or have even put your kids back into the public school system. I have watched all of this happen in real time, and I bet many of you have too. Before you know it, The compromise has cost you the very things that you wanted. Suddenly, you've lost the days of letting your son slow down and take twice as long as he needs to do his math book because he needs more time to understand. Gone are the days of you teaching your children about science from a biblical worldview because you settled for the secular or neutral curriculum. Gone are the days of early morning backyard play followed by reading classics in the afternoon just because you can. Gone are the extended discussions with your teenagers about capitalism, Marxism, and humanism because they're very busy with the state's requirements. Not only will your family suffer from this compromise, the wider homeschool community does too. And this is the thing that I don't think people understand if they say, well, I'm okay with restrictions. So many people say, if you don't like it, don't do it. Or you don't have to opt in if you don't like it, but let the rest of us. I really want you to understand how this will change the face of homeschooling because it's already happening in various states where this has been implemented. Co-ops will shift or even start by only accepting voucher money, which raises the prices of the co-op. If the state is offering families thousands of dollars, co-ops are going to raise their prices to meet that, just like small private schools will. Christian homeschool curriculum providers are forced to either change their curriculum to meet the state standards or go out of business because the money is now flowing to the secular companies or the approved vendors. The very definition of homeschooling suddenly becomes unclear. The family first organic method of education at home slowly disappears and the state is once again in charge. This is the ultimate goal. This is not a conspiracy. It is verifiable fact. The United Nations has been working toward this for decades, since I was a kid. And lobbyists and donors and politicians have all bought into the pressure. Tina Hollenbeck is one of those pioneers that I mentioned, and she said this: once bureaucrats get a foothold into controlling some homeschoolers, they will find ways to extend the control to all. Thus, the only way to maintain all homeschoolers' independence from government overreach into our homes is by everyone refusing any and all offers of government-sponsored financial help. When we pay, we get the say, as it should be. Well, ESAs, vouchers, freedom accounts, whatever you want to call them, they have been slowly implemented across the nation in different states and under different names. And the results are already becoming apparent in many of those places. Homeschoolers forced to use secular, state-approved curriculum. Some states are trying to pass bills forcing homeschoolers to teach their gender ideology. Some states are trying to pass bills or have already that force ESA recipients to undergo well visits or to follow the state vaccination requirements. And this leads to different kinds of losses of freedom, not just educational freedom at home. So in Texas, just last year, they passed this bill, and this week is when the applications were opened up. And when the bill was passed last year, I made a prediction, and I'm going to share it with you here. And I want you to mark my words because I feel very confident this is what will happen. So I've been watching this and opposing it for about 10 years. It has been 10 years now. And this is what I see. First, only the recipients of the money will be scrutinized because they're not going to give you money for nothing without some requirement that says you're spending it wisely. Next, when the state or the populace decides that homeschoolers aren't doing it right, all homeschoolers will be scrutinized. The thing about homeschooling is it is very independent and very private and very unique to each family. And you might even look at other homeschoolers and think, oh, they're not doing it right. Or someone might look at you and think, you're not doing this right. There is no right way to homeschool because homeschools are families and each family is as individual as their Christmas decorations or the carpet on their floor. And that is the beauty. That is the ultimate beauty, is the individuality of each little family raising their children to be individuals and not standardized. And so, no, we won't look like we're doing it right when you compare us to the state system, who, as I would like to throw in, is also not doing it right. Next up, there will be calls for more oversight on all homeschoolers because of this. Because if the funds are going to families that don't homeschool in a way that looks like normal public school education, then eventually there will be an outcry saying that's not how you teach kids. They're not doing it right. So now we need to look at how all the homeschoolers are doing this. And then bills will be introduced to impose minimum requirements, assessments, and data collection on all homeschoolers. This has already been tried in West Virginia. Once they passed their bill, 2 years later, they introduced a bill to impose the restrictions on all homeschoolers, whether they were taking money or not. So I'm already telling you, based on experience, what is going to happen. There will probably be bills imposed to have more medical oversight in the homes of homeschoolers. This has been introduced in several already, and that means, are they going to well child doctor visits when we think they should? Are they on the state public school vaccination schedule? So it's not even just the loss of education freedom anymore, it's the loss of medical freedom, because there's always somebody who thinks they know how everyone should act. And then, as I say in Texas, our status as one of the best homeschool states will disappear. We are one of the best, the most free, because as I said, there is no reporting, no testing, no list of requirements. You're just free to teach your children. Additionally, homeschool curriculum prices will increase, and some of the smaller businesses will have to go out of business because they can't compete with the people who are taking in state funds, these education vendor coupons. Homeschool co-ops that don't accept ESA money will shrink while the people move to state-funded co-ops. And the homeschoolers who take the money, which I will call ESA homeschoolers, will begin to look at the private homeschoolers and wish they had the freedoms that we have, which will actually result in the opposite. The free homeschoolers not taking the funds will be affected by ESA laws until homeschooling in Texas, but honestly across the nation, will not be recognizable. This is the goal. This is verifiable fact too. I have videos and statements on my website that go back to the 1990s, where Betsy DeVos said all education should be public. That is the goal. And I'm going to link in the description of this show everything I've ever written on school choice. And I have done my research, not only with Betsy DeVos, but also the goals of the United Nations. I don't want you to forget what homeschooling is like right now, where you can set your schedule, choose your curriculum, change it in January or February or July or whenever you need to, or slow down or speed up. You can let your kids move as fast or as slow as they want to when you are not under the thumb of the state. Now, I realize some states don't even have it as good as Texas, but I'm telling you, coming from a state where we have no restrictions on how we teach our children, that's what you want. That should be the ultimate goal. And when you take the state's money, even in a state with already heavy restrictions, you're going to look at heavier restrictions. I'm not going to forget how homeschooling was and how it is right now. I've been a homeschooler in Texas since 1985, first as a child and for the past 26 years as a mom. I will not forget. I will not forget who traded away our freedom for a couple $1,000s a year, and I hope you won't either. I want you to do your best to avoid taking ESAs or vouchers or whatever they call it. If the state is offering you a check, I beg you, look away and stay privately funded. I have another podcast that I've already done on how and why to do that. And so feel free to hold me accountable to my predictions and stick around for a few years and let's see what happens. Bookmark this podcast. Go look at my posts where I put all of this in print too. Fact check me because I think I'm going to be right. I'll update regularly as I see the changes happen. But in the meantime, please don't take the bait. It is a Trojan horse. It is a carrot to control you. Parents who take responsibility for the upbringing of their children are a threat to the liberal agenda. And you know it, and I know it. So please go back to the reason that you started homeschooling and ask yourself if it had anything to do with being part of the public school system again. I bet you it didn't. I bet you your goal was to be very different from the public school system and to have the independence that parents ought to have. Education is not the government's department. As Israel Wayne says, who is another homeschool pioneer, the Bible specifically only gives parents and grandparents the job and authority of educating children, no one else. So if a government agency is telling you that they will allow you to teach your children at home or allow you to use certain materials, they've already overstepped their bounds. Do not let them encroach any further. Politics might be foreign and uncomfortable to you, but I want to be clear. It is through politics that your freedoms are won and lost. So if this is a new idea to you, I want you to know you don't have to be an activist. You just need to be knowledgeable and aware. You need to be a homeschooler who is connected with other knowledgeable homeschoolers so that you know when legislation has been introduced that could affect your homeschool freedom. Look to your state organization, except the one in Texas, because Texas Homeschool Coalition has been pushing this ESA mess for years. And so they are not, I don't believe they are protecting the freedom of homeschoolers. In fact, they've lost tons of members because of it. So check to see how your state views vouchers and ESAs, and then go to them, support them, seek their advice on new legislation that's been introduced, talk to your representatives, make the phone calls, write letters and emails, and vote accordingly. Remember why you started homeschooling in the first place. Remember your original goal. Keep that vision in mind and protect homeschooling for your family and for future generations. Be bold. Talk about it with your friends. Say something on social media. Get connected to other homeschoolers. The freedom to educate our children in America is super important. We can and should thank the early pioneers for giving us this freedom, but it is our responsibility to keep it. For more information on everything that has to do with school choice, I'm going to give you a link in this description to the category school choice on my website, NickiTruesdale.com. And I hope you'll go and read and listen to what's there and take this to heart and avoid the bait. Thank you for listening.
Homeschooling is more than academics. It's discipleship, family, and faith in action. I'm Yvette Hampton, producer of the Schoolhouse Rocked podcast. Each week, we bring you powerful conversations with trusted homeschool leaders and real families packed with biblical wisdom, practical tips, and heartfelt encouragement. You're not alone, and you can homeschool with confidence and joy. The Schoolhouse Rocked podcast, where faith, family, and homeschooling come together. Listen on your favorite podcast app or at schoolhouserocked.com.
Thank you for listening to my podcast today. If you want more content like this, you can go to my website at NickiTruesdale.com. That's NickiTruesdell.com. And find me on Facebook, Instagram, and X. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time.